Chinese society has a bystander problem, and it's made worse by the authorities' affinity for punishing heroes. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. We don't do this too often, but we're going to start today's episode with a China Uncensored mental health break. Cute puppies, hold on to this feeling because we're about to make a sharp pivot. Last month, Chinese society was stunned by the public murder of a local celebrity. It took place at an open square in the northeastern city of Songyuan, where different groups of people often gathered to dance. Chief among them was the endearing Mr. Zhao, who was a well-known local figure referred to around town as bag-clutching brother, because he would hold on to a small bag while dancing enthusiastically. I much prefer bag-clutching brother to China's usual big brother. But that evening, Zhao's dancing was abruptly interrupted when a man suddenly bumped into him and then began to viciously stab him with a knife. Before long, Zhao was lying in a pool of his own blood with the stabber towering over him. Zhao later died from his wounds. The attacker was reportedly triggered by Zhao's dance moves and a brief moment of eye contact. But beyond that, the two of them had no prior relation before the assault, which makes sense it was a stranger because to know bag-clutching brother was to love him. The act of random violence caused shock and disbelief in China, not just because it was a brutal attack in a peaceful public setting, but even more so because so many people appeared to just stand by and do nothing while a man was being murdered right in front of their eyes. He just stabbed him like that in front of everyone, and so many people were watching. One commentator subsequently wrote on the social media platform Weibo. Others said that they were speechless at the lack of action from people in the crowd. Such public apathy from onlookers in the presence of an emergency has been a topic of discussion for decades in China and has been referred to as China's bystander problem. It gained particular attention in 2011 following the case of 2-year-old Wang Yue. 2 years old? Yeah, I'm going to need another preemptive hit of that sweet mental health break. Oh yeah, that's the good stuff. All right, let's dive back in. A surveillance camera showed Wang wander onto a narrow road in the southeastern Guangdong province, where she was run over by a truck. Subsequently, 18 people passed right by the mortally wounded toddler without helping her. By the time an elderly garbage collector came to her aid, it was too late. Which is ironic that it was a garbage collector who finally tried to help her because everyone else was acting like complete trash. China has been plagued by similar cases in more recent years as well. In 2017, no one paused to help a woman in China's central Henan province who was lying completely exposed on a busy road after she had been struck by a taxi. So the woman was eventually run over by another vehicle and later died from the injuries she sustained. In 2016, in a Beijing hotel, a man reportedly assaulted a woman in a corridor of the hotel while staff nearby told him to stop but did nothing to interfere. These appalling incidents have made Chinese people examine the state of morality and social ethics in modern China. A closer look at the neighborhood where 2-year-old Wang was run over, for example, revealed that most of the people living in the area were migrant workers from all over China, and therefore had little in common beyond their shared desire to make money and improve their lot. You'd think not wanting to see a 2-year-old suffer would be something everyone had in common, but nope, just get rich or die trying, and ignore the dying. This led to discussions about whether deteriorating social cohesion in an urbanizing China was the cause of people failing to help out fellow Chinese in danger, even when they're innocent toddlers. The narrative that this is a particularly pronounced problem in China was amplified by another case from the same year Wang died. A Chinese woman was stabbed 9 times at Shanghai's Pudong airport, and as she was bleeding out, it was a foreigner that rushed to her aid while Chinese people looked on. But in an article in the Global Times, it was afterwards argued that a failure to intervene by heartless bystanders is not solely a Chinese problem. Rather, cases of apathetic bystanders demonstrate troubling facets of human psychology that are hardly unique to China. As longtime watchers of this show will know, I'm not the biggest fan of the Global Times. That's why I can't believe I'm about to say this, but Global Times is right about this one. The bystander problem is not a phenomenon unique to China. In fact, it's been discussed by anthropologists and psychologists for decades. It's generally known as the bystander effect. The idea behind the bystander effect is that there is an inhibiting influence of the presence of others on a person's willingness to help someone in need. Basically, the theory goes that if a lot of people are around as an emergency unfolds, there's a risk that everyone will wait for someone else to intervene, which will result in no one intervening. In fact, the notorious case that really ignited significant interest in the bystander effect happened in the US. On a late night in 1964, the 28-year-old bartender Kitty Genovese was stabbed in front of her building in Queens, New York, as she was making her way home from work. Although several neighbors heard her cry out, they didn't react in a way that was timely and effective enough to prevent the attacker from robbing her, raping her, and killing her. There are many morals to this story, but one is, don't wait for someone else to do what should be done now, whether it's helping someone in need or taking the trash out when it's overflowing. Your roommate will thank you. More recently, in 2021, a woman was groped and then raped on a subway in Philadelphia, while other subway riders allegedly did nothing. These kinds of crimes, whether they're happening in the US or China, are horrifying, and they can easily leave behind a very depressing impression of modern human behavior. Now, luckily, an international study from 2019 shows that things might not be as depressing as they seem. Thank goodness, because I don't know how much more puppy footage we have left, and I feel like I need so many more mental health breaks. According to the study, based on surveillance footage from 200 violent crimes, bystanders do in fact intervene in 90% of cases. People have taken action to stop assaults, armed robberies, knife attacks, and have prevented others from getting run over by subway trains. So this isn't necessarily a case of humanity being the worst so much as the news prioritizing the negative and pushing the positive stories to the back of the line. It's like that wise old saying, never attribute to malice that which can be adequately explained by the stupidity of mainstream media. And although China was not included in the study, there have been cases too where Chinese strangers have placed themselves in danger in order to help. Last month, a Chinese woman named Hu Youping reportedly confronted an attacker that viciously assaulted a Japanese woman and her child with a knife at a bus stop in the eastern Chinese city of Suzhou. Hu paid for her heroism with her life, but the mother and child survived. In another example, when 4 American college instructors from Iowa were assaulted in another stabbing last month in the northeastern city of Jilin, it was reported that a Chinese man was injured as he tried to intervene. So what do such interventions say about China? Can discussions about the country's bystander problem be laid to rest and bystander cases dismissed as simply a few unfortunate exceptions? Unfortunately, no. The bystander problem rightfully remains a serious concern in China. The thing is, bystander cases are much more likely to happen in China because the country's legal and political system outright discourages people from intervening in an emergency. Psychologically speaking, bystanders are presumed to weigh the costs and rewards of helping when they see someone in need. And for Chinese people, helping those in need can be all cost, no reward. In 2006, for example, when an elderly Chinese woman fell and injured herself near a bus stop in the eastern city of Nanjing, a young Chinese man named Peng Yu reportedly helped her get to the hospital and even paid for some of her medical treatment. But the woman then sued Yu for compensation, claiming that he had in fact caused the fall that led to her injury. A judge ruled in the woman's favor, arguing that under normal circumstances, nobody would take a stranger to the hospital, let alone pay their medical bills unless they were somehow responsible for the injury. Yes, China is such a cynical place, they think acting like a decent human being is proof of guilt. In a very similar case from 2015, a university student in the eastern Anhui province named Xiao Yuan got off her bike and accompanied to the hospital an elderly woman that had fallen and broken her hip. Xiao Yuan even paid an advance for the medical costs along with a fellow university student of hers when it turned out the injured woman didn't have enough money on her. Afterwards, the injured woman's family blamed Xiao Yuan for the fall and held her liable for the injury. One family member said about Xiao Yuan paying the advance that if it was not her fault, then why would she do that? An eyewitness to the incident later came forward posting pictures of the incident and stating on Weibo that the lady was not knocked down. So all the people who just watched as people were bleeding out were probably thinking, I want to help, but that could financially destroy me. These incidents of what appears to be Good Samaritans getting sued for their kindness caused public outrage. In turn, this led to a national Good Samaritan law being put into effect. The law's supposed aim is to ease the reluctance people feel towards helping strangers for fear of legal repercussions if they make mistakes in treatment. But it clearly hasn't had the intended effect. Wow, communists being bad at helping people, who'd have thunk? During the attack on bag-clutching brother Mr. Zhao last month, one witness to the stabbing who knew the victim later said he wanted to help but was scared to intervene, fearing he might be implicated if the police ruled it a mutual fight instead of justified defense. Around the same time, a blogger lamented some of the conditions in Chinese society that have allowed for such stabbings to take place without anyone intervening, adding that Chinese people have become numb and fearful. Which happened in the Soviet Union, too. It's almost like it's a feature of communism. And it makes sense that the prospect of lawsuits and punishment by the police makes even willing Chinese people think twice before aiding those in need. On top of that, Chinese people that have decided to help in circumstances where not one, but many lives were at risk, have found themselves in even deeper trouble. Back in the 1990s, entire villages across central China experienced an alarming spike in HIV cases. Also, for those of you keeping score, toddler death, stabbings, sexual assault, heroes turned to villains, and now HIV outbreaks. This is officially the darkest China Uncensored episode of all time. Gynecologist Gao Yaojie found that a series of blood transfusion centers set up with government assistance were the culprit. These centers would entice poor local farmers to donate blood used for plasma extraction. But poor hygienic standards, combined with the pooling of blood from multiple donors that was re-injected into people, allowed HIV to spread with devastating effects. Xuping Wang was working at one of the plasma centers, and she spoke out about the gross negligence she witnessed. That scandal left more than 100,000 people infected with HIV and killed at least 10,000 before Wang's and Gao's efforts led to the exposure of the scheme. To this day, the Chinese government has refused to admit its complicity in the scandal despite calls for it to do so. Wow, the CCP refusing to admit its part in killing thousands of its own citizens? Who'da thunk? Even though Wang's and Gao's admirable work probably saved thousands of Chinese lives, they were not rewarded for their efforts. Instead, the Chinese authorities put Gao under house arrest in 2007, while Wang lost her job, was attacked, and had her clinic vandalized. Because in China, doing the right thing isn't good karma, it's a felony. In 2019, when a play about Wang's life was put into production, Chinese state security officers made threatening visits to her relatives and former colleagues in China. In a similar case from a few years back, Dr. Li Wenliang, who was working at Wuhan Central Hospital in 2020, was silenced and investigated by local authorities when he started to raise alarms about a new virus that was spreading fast. That new virus would come to be known as COVID-19. It's pretty obscure. I wouldn't blame you for not having heard about it. Li would succumb to it a few months after he tried to warn the world about what was coming. So it might be true that bystander problems have not only been discussed in China, but it is in China that the ruling Chinese Communist Party has established a system where heroes that intervene are punished for their kindness and their bravery. This system has created a situation where bystander incidents are more likely to occur, not because Chinese people don't want to help, but because by the time they have considered the consequences that helping could have for themselves and their families, tragedy has already unfolded. For those that sit atop this perverted system, let's hope for their sake that they won't one day be in critical need of help from Chinese strangers. They might find it in short supply. And now, because we need it, one final mental health break. And click this video where I discuss some of the morally gray areas that happen in war in the game This War of Mine, where you manage a band of civilian survivors in a city under siege. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.